Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Suzanne is a former actress and former Miss Arab USA turned writer. Her dark comedy called Postpartum Me is now an Amazon bestseller. She uses it to comfort mothers experiencing the shock of early motherhood and postpartum depression. The book offers support and understanding and says all things that so many mothers think but are way too afraid to say out loud. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today. We're kind of mashing the birth and postpartum story up with kind of a professional in a way episode to kind of have you here to tell your birth and postpartum story and your experience with postpartum depression and how we can kind of, advocate for all of these types of mental health things a little bit more and help each other out. So thank you for joining me. I know this isn't, the easiest topic to talk about all the time, but I know that you, take that on. So I figure it would be a good time to have you here. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited.
For anybody listening, obviously we are talking about postpartum depression today. So if you feel like you may get triggered from this, obviously feel free to skip through. There are plenty of other episodes that are a lot more lighthearted. But when Suzanne and I were talking, we were saying how you like to take kind of more of you want to tell everybody about your perspective when you talk about these kinds of topics. I feel like you explained it the best. You're not taking it super deep dive and dark, but in fact, a bit more humor related, right?
Yeah. So I wrote a book about it because I was so pissed off when I came out of my postpartum depression. I was like, every mother before me has lied to me. I was so mad. So I wrote this book. But of course, you have to know who you're writing for. And I was like, okay, I'm writing for moms who are in the middle. My goal is you were reading it while you're depressed. And so I was like, I can't have a mom read this book who's depressed and then close the book and be more depressed. You know what I mean? It's so horrible. So I wrote it and I tried to make it funny. And I say dark humor. Sometimes it's not dark humor. Sometimes the humor is light, but it's a dark topic.
The humor
ends up being it's kind of dark, but it's kind of light.
It's perfect. It keeps a dark topic lighthearted if possible, right? So I wanted to mention that too, because, that'll probably end up being a lot of the way that we're talking this episode.
Yeah.
Yes, we're not talking about the most lovely topic in the world, but it needs to be talked about. And if we can make it feel a bit more lighthearted, I feel like people are more up to talking about it. So I'm excited. Anyways, so if we want to dive in, I'd love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about your life pre-baby, what you kind of were doing with your life, all of that stuff. And then we'll kind of dive into maybe what pregnancy was like for you and we can go from there.
I was amazing. I loved my life. I was an actress. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. There's a film industry here and I had a commercial agent. And so I did commercials, which isn't that fun, but I did indie films, which was so fun. And I'd do action movies and oh my God, it was so cool. And I just had a really big life and my husband and I traveled a lot and, it was so perfect and it was so full and it was so full of creativity. I had such a good time. I had such a good time. And I really, really loved my life. And I really loved who I was, which made everything, in the epilogue.
Yeah.
Because I felt I was I'm giving up a lot of really cool things and also a lot of my identity, which every mom I've ever talked to is I don't know, I look in the mirror and I don't even recognize myself anymore. I'm yep.
Right. You're a whole new human.
Yeah. So, I had a really, really great life, was really, really blessed, did a lot of really cool stuff, was a human rights activist and had been in some dangerous situations in the field, which is for me was so cool,
That is so cool.
Flying over my head. I'm this is crazy and awesome, but it's awesome. I like that my boys are going to learn that someday about me,
Yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's so cool. So now remind me, when was your first born?
2015.
Okay. So rewinding back to 2015, what was, I mean, I guess as a whole, you could kind of explain, but what was pregnancy like for you? And did you have anything going into like your birth or your postpartum period that you had, really done research on or prepared for, or you really wanted? Everybody nowadays makes birth plans. I don't know if you
Yeah.
had one of those. Like, what were you hoping to get out of this? And what were you hoping to, avoid,
I wanted a home birth. My husband was like, absolutely not. That terrifies me, and I'm like, okay, it's your baby too. And I understand that that's really scary for you. And then I don't remember how, but I found out about birth centers. So
Yes.
it's like, oh, I could have a midwife. I could be in the comfort of what feels like your bedroom. It's like, there was
Right.
like a master bedroom with a bathroom in the side. Just like a master bedroom. There were two midwives, and you would like interchange every week seeing them because you didn't know who was going to be on call
Mm-hmm.
at the time of your birth. So we opted for that. I didn't want the hospital. It was across the street from Phoenix Children's Hospital, and it was down the street from St. Joe's, like if something were to happen to me. So I felt like it was just perfectly situated. I wanted a water birth, did not have one. So that was my like birth plan, is I wanted a water birth. I didn't do like too much reading about it because I just figured like biology, like people know, like, and I have got midwives and it's fine. And like,
Right.
I did go to a birthing class at the birth center,
Yep.
um, which is the most terrifying thing you can do. Like, they show you like videos of like, what is the birth when like you're on the baby's breached and you're like on all
Yep.
fours and you're trying to like pull it out backwards. And I'm just like, oh my God, like it was so horrific. It was so, so horrific.
It can be overwhelming for sure.
You don't know, like, that could happen. That could happen
Right.
to me. I don't know. I was
Right.
like, I breached when I was a baby. I breached the last 2 weeks. So, I'm like, you don't know what
Who
to expect.
knows?
I did not know so much. I did not know that you poop a lot when you're, you
Yep.
know, did not know that. Like, why does nobody tell you this? Why?
Right. Right.
Keeping it a secret. So that really, that really upset me. And I'm really like, I'm very open and I'll talk about stuff, but that I don't like to talk about, or like I don't discuss that stuff with my husband. It's like really weird, like we keep the doors closed. And then next thing you know, I'm sitting here like just shitting everywhere in front of him.
Right.
And I kept trying to I was sitting on the toilet because it's a really comfortable place to just like be, you're
Labor
sitting,
in.
your
Yeah.
window open. And I was still trying to courtesy flush. Like every time I pooped, I would like flush a little bit because I was still embarrassed and in my head, even though I
Right.
was still all this pain. And I hated that I didn't know that was going to happen. I could have
Right.
prepared for it. I could have told him, but we like did not discuss it. Um, yeah. So there was just things like that where I was like, why is nobody talking?
Nobody talking about it. Right. So postpartum wise, when you were preparing for all of this, were there
Yeah.
things that you were, expecting, or did you, I guess, have a history of any type of like mental health stuff, or was this kind of all sprung on you? Because I know,
Oh,
some people prepare for it. They're like, oh, I have mental health stuff now, but that
yeah.
doesn't mean that everybody who experiences any type of, mental health things postpartum doesn't mean that you have to have a mental health like background.
But it would make sense, right? If you have a history of depression and then you got depressed after a baby, that would be like, yeah, that checks
Right.
out. I
Right.
did not have a history of depression. So it like never even came to my mind that that's what it was. So for a while I was experiencing it, I didn't know that's what it was. I was like, for me, it was, I think we talked about this when we interviewed, correlation is causation. So the same time I became a mom was the same time I became depressed. And I didn't know I was depressed. I was like, oh, these are the feelings that are equated with becoming a mother. That's
Right.
it. That was it.
Right.
And so it was even hard to like advocate for myself because I didn't know that I didn't know that those were the signs of depression. I just thought, oh, this is like, why complain about being a mom? Like, there's nothing you could do about it. You can't help me. I'm already a mom. It's too late. And I just thought that this is mom life. And I was like, why
Yeah.
do people do this more than once? This is terrible.
Which I think is exactly like I couldn't have said it better, because that's totally true. I think that people just, when they don't know any different, and this is what it's supposed to be like, and then it makes a lot of sense as to why then people don't talk about it, because they don't want to complain about being a mom, because you're supposed to be this happy, perfect, la la la, rainbows and sunshine person,
Yeah.
right? You're supposed to
Yeah.
love this motherhood, but that doesn't mean that that's the truth, right? As we know.
Right. Well, I think we do it to ourselves, and but we do it because we've got it from other people. So like
Right.
the expectations of motherhood, which we all talk about, like how that's absolute bullshit.
Yep.
But it really, really is, because, and I talk about this in my book. When they say mothers are goddesses, like we'll do like pregnancy photos and the moms are like flowing in the
Yes.
ocean with like a dress that's like getting wet and in their hair is in the wind is and you're like, oh, you're a goddess. But that's not what they mean when they say that. What they
Right.
mean is that you're a Madonna, like you're the Virgin Mary. You're like a one note individual, and that's it. So I'm like, yeah, we are goddesses, but take that to its completion, please. What are the attributes of a goddess? The goddesses are all these things.
Right.
They're fierce and they're pissy and they're hormonal and they're emotional and they're sexy and they're angry and they're joyous and they're like
There's
everything.
so much more than one side.
And I don't
I
think that
love
that's
that.
expected of us when we become mothers.
I love that like description and explanation of it because I never thought of it that way, but it's so true. It's so true. That's amazing. So now, you said you didn't end up getting this water birth that you wanted, but did you still have this midwifery birth with your little one?
Yeah. Yeah. I ended up just collapsing on the bed and I had the birth in bed, which is the worst way to have a baby, by the way. So like I feel bad for every woman in a hospital who's like forced to be on a bed. Um,
Right.
it's the worst way to do it. It's just, mamas, if you're pregnant, like try not to do it. Standing, squatting, like anything is better than just laying
Yeah.
on. Also, I remember like I was laying there and then my eyes were closed. So I was
Mhm.
tired. And I'm like, why does it hurt more when my eyes are closed and I'm just laying here? Like, why is the pain so intense? And my midwife is like, it's because your brain isn't taking in anything. Your brain isn't taking in light. Your brain isn't forced to like, carry your body when you're walking around or squatting or anything. It doesn't have to do anything. So all of its focus goes in on just the one
On
thing
the
that
one
it's
pain.
doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm like, oh, that checks out. That makes a
That
lot of
makes a
sense.
lot of sense.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
So I had the birth and it was fine. And he it was that was so smooth. It came out
Oh,
smoothly.
good.
Like
That's awesome. So now, because you had this birth, you were
mhm.
probably able to go home pretty quickly, right?
We went home that night.
Right.
He
So,
was
what was
at
it like immediately being home postpartum? What kind of feelings were coming up? I'd just love to hear kind of like what the whole process of that postpartum looked like, and then the realization, I guess, of, oh my gosh, this is postpartum depression compared to like, this is just kind of how I was feeling, like you said, like this just is
yeah,
quote unquote motherhood. You know what I mean?
yeah. So that was like, I mean, months or a year later when I realized
Okay.
I had depression. So this was just me, like my husband watched me spiral and had no idea why. So we got home and it was like the pretty normal first couple of weeks. Like he slept on the floor because he was afraid I wanted to co-sleep. He was afraid of squishing the baby. So he slept on the floor and me and Sammy slept in the bed for like 2 weeks straight. We woke up in the middle of the night and he would have like remember this like red dusty stuff in his diaper and we were like freaking out and we're like, what is this? And we Googled it and it was fine. And we were like, oh my God, thank God for Google. Cause like every time when Sammy had like those muscle spasms, when
Uh-huh.
they're first born and they just like,
Yes, yes, yes.
I'm like, what's happening? Is he having a seizure? Like you just don't know. And then the word SIDS kept running through my head, sudden infant death syndrome. I just kept saying it over and over in my head, like a record player just hanging out in the back of my head over and over again. I would either hear my bot like just constantly in my brain, SIDS, 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 sudden infant death syndrome, sudden infant death syndrome, like it just constantly playing, even while I'm speaking, even while I'm sleeping, like just always there. So that was terrifying because they're like, oh, your baby might die for absolutely no reason. Okay, good
Right.
luck, and that's
Right.
so, are you kidding me? And there's nothing you can do to stop it. And there's no signs. Like that's so horrific. I was terrified of being alone with him. Like I took me a week before I was alone with him because I just couldn't allow that to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen. What if something bad happened when I didn't know. I didn't know what to expect, but I just knew it was going to be
Right.
bad. The first day I drove alone with him, I had to call my mother-in-law and keep her on the phone because I was just horrified. So there's just like a lot of, just natural anxiety, like very normal, expected anxiety, especially the first 2 weeks. And this is something to really think about. You're going to have the baby blues. If you have them, you have the baby blues, and they're the first 2 weeks. Okay. It's very easy to get used to something. So like your brain's like things that are comfortable and familiar. So
Right.
you have it for 2 weeks. You're like, this is my new normal. And then you keep experiencing the same feelings from the baby blues months later. You're just like, this is what it is. And that's
Right.
not normal. So we need to like understand and tell mamas there's a break in that. And that baby blues are expected and it's okay. And your body's just like, you just lost a shit ton of hormones and that's fine.
Yep.
But if it continues, you need to talk to somebody. And I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think it is. It's people are like, oh, they hear about baby blues or like, postpartum depression, but like they don't really know what that really consists of. And that and that baby blues is only a really 2 week period. People are like, oh, it's just a little small period. But when you're in it, you're like, what's a small period? Is a small period 2 weeks? Is a small period this full 3 months? Is it their first year of life? I don't know.
Right.
And you're not going to ask about it because, like we said, you're supposed to be enjoying this blissful time, right? And then you quickly and easily find other reasons to say why you're feeling the way you're feeling, right? Like I'm sure that you're like, oh, it's just because I'm overtired. Yep. Yep. It's just because this is new. It's just because I have to focus on someone else and not me first. You find all things. It's just because I'm stressed about breastfeeding. There's so many things you can blame it on, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's so important to just notice those things.
Yeah. So what are those things? Those things are like, for example, I had a very hard time understanding my reality. Like I actually kept thinking that I was in a dream and I wasn't waking up.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say this, I'm like, oh my God, please wake me up. And I would ask my father-in-law, I'm like, this isn't real, right? Like I actually could not distinguish fact from fiction. I was convinced it wasn't real. That's weird. That's really weird. I had a hard time, and I'm a really big Harry Potter fan. And she did such a good job, the writer, so beautifully explaining depression that I'm just like, well, I'm just going to use her analogy. She gets it. So why reinvent the wheel?
Right.
So she in the books, and of course in the movies, she talks about Dementors. If you've seen do you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the Dementors are these, for those who don't know, they're these magical creatures who guard the wizarding prison, and they don't kill you, but what they do is they suck all the joy out of you. So they come up to you and they like suck in, and what they're doing is they're taking happy thoughts until you're left with no thoughts or with no happy thoughts. And at some point they'll do what they kiss you. And when they kiss you, they like take your soul away. So your soul is this happiness that you are now deprived of. And the counter curse is thinking of things that are really happy to get the Dementor to go away. Is you think of like the most beautiful, genuine, happy thoughts. And when you are, and that's depression, that was her embodiment of depression, was the Dementors. And so when I was experiencing it, I remember thinking, because I had like read all the books and I'm super obsessed, and I just made my kids watch number 4, like just today. It was the happiest day of my life. I'm like, they're paying attention.
Oh my gosh.
I have questions. I was like, I want to do like a report afterwards. I'm like,
oh my gosh. Your day home from school consists of a book report.
Anyway, I remember thinking like, I can't think of one thing that I'm happy for. I can't think of one thing that I'm grateful for. Was I ever happy? And like, I couldn't conjure up anything happy. It took everything out of me. And it was so weird because I'm naturally a happy person. I brood sometimes, but I think that's because I'm a writer and an artist. Like you just do that. And I'm naturally a grateful person, which also messed with me because my parents are immigrants. And so I learned gratitude. Like, oh, I know how wonderful it is to live in this country and how blessed we are with so many opportunities and safety. My parents didn't have that growing up. Like my mom was imprisoned at the age of 12. So you can't sit there and like be sad. This is what I'm telling myself. Okay.
So right. So you're like, I can't be out here saying that I'm feeling this way because other people have it worse, kind of a thing.
Other people have it worse. I'm sad. In Scottsdale, which is a resort town for people who don't like this. I'm just surrounded by golf courses and resorts and like $100,000 cars. Like this is a very affluent area. And I'm sad with my healthy baby in my condo that's paid off. Oh, poor little girl. Like, isn't it rough? And I would like tell myself, and I'm like, you're being a little bitch, like stop. And so I did not take that seriously. And I could still talk myself into that, except for the fact that I was doing this to my child. And I know it's like, I didn't mean to do it, but things that I was experiencing are going into Sammy, and we're sharing energies. And so I'm depressed and I'm miserable and I'm putting that onto Sammy. I was blaming Sammy. Like my postpartum wasn't like I'm obsessed with my child and I nobody else touch him. Like no, my postpartum was like he's ruining my life. Like I had such a good life and now it's over and it's his fault. And I'm feeding that energy into him and he's feeding it back to me, and he was a horrible baby, like just cried nonstop and he never slept. And now I'm like, oh well, yeah, that makes sense. Of course he was, I like he wasn't feeling the things that he should have probably been feeling. Which really, like, that's something that I'm never going to get over, as a mom, that I missed that time that I didn't give him those things. And I know it's not my fault, but it still makes me sad that that's the reality of the situation.
Right. And it's so hard because yes, your life is so changed, right? With a new child. Like, yes, you are now this new title. You are this mom. You have someone else to think about before yourself. I always say, and I've said it in so many episodes already, but like, it's almost like an unhealthy relationship. Like this baby is pulling everything out of you and they're not giving anything back.
Relationship.
Yes. And like, they're not even smiling for real smiling reasons for a while. You don't get much out of it for a little while there, but that doesn't mean that it should feel like that for an elongated period of time, right? Like that adjustment and like not loving every part of motherhood is normal, but not being able to find the joys, or not being able to find many joys is not what we want, right? We want you to still be happy and to still be enjoying life and finding ways that make you, and things that make you smile, right?
This is where it gets a little confusing for people who had never been depressed like me. When you have depression, at least postpartum, like I can only speak to the postpartum kind. I can't speak to not that kind. But when you have it, it's not like you're in a perpetual state of, you're not like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, it's not like you're just like perpetually sad all day, but there is a weight that you constantly carry. And the way I described it in my book is there's like this cloud that's like hanging out right here behind your head, and it's slowly filling up with like all these terrible thoughts and darkness. And something really, for me, it was like something really small would happen. And sometimes it was really trivial. Like I put the wrong sock on the wrong foot, which is impossible to do, but it's like, that's like ridiculous, how ridiculous it would be sometimes. And then the cloud would just burst on top of me. And then everything went dark and I couldn't get myself out of it. And that was really, really weird, but it always was there, and I could like function, like I could FaceTime my sister and I could laugh and I could I would function, but it was,
you're masking it all, right? Like you're acting like what you're supposed to be feeling like.
Yeah. But there was this constant weight just on my chest all the time. And then every once in a while, I couldn't take it. And then I would just, it would burst.
Yeah. Now, you said that it took you over a year to figure out like that this was what it was, right? That you were able to put this postpartum depression label on how you were feeling. Okay. My two questions to that would be, one, how did you figure this out? What kind of was that click moment? And then secondly, were you still experiencing this postpartum depression at that time? Or had it kind of started to fade at that point? And what did you do to help get yourself out of that?
Okay. So it started to fade at that point. It was fading. Like it wasn't gone, but I was like kind of getting a handle of things, handle on things. It was a friend who was a therapist. She was like, have you considered that you might have postpartum depression? And I was like, how dare you? I was very,
right.
I was like, but I've never been depressed before. Also, no. And I just kind of like moved on, I didn't want to kind of give it the time of day, but you know how like you buy a blue car and suddenly you see blue cars everywhere.
Yeah.
So I that came into my head and then I started to sort of like see signs of it everywhere. Suddenly I was like, oh, well, this makes sense. Okay. Right. And then I went and talked to a therapist about it to confirm that that's what it was. But yeah, I had a therapist friend who was like, you should just maybe possibly consider, but I didn't like that she said that. I was very, because you know what that means? It means like I'm just failing. Like I'm just a horrible mom. And, oh, great. Now I have depression and I got to still take care of this little guy while doing taking care of this. Are you kidding me? Like I do not need this right now. And that did not make me feel better that I was diagnosed. It didn't help.
And it must be one of those things where it's like, it feels like it's just adding another thing to the plate, right? And in
Yeah.
reality, what your friend and eventually what your therapist and everything ended up, I'm sure, being able to help and figure out is that, in fact, acknowledging it and working on it makes one thing go away. So that way you feel like you can try to enjoy,
Right.
those moments again. But that's not without work.
Well, okay, so that's the problem. That's the problem. You are a new mother. You are exhausted. Your body aches. You look at yourself in the mirror and you don't recognize yourself. You're this walking zombie. You have depression. Maybe you know it, maybe you don't. And then you're supposed to, I'm sorry, and I'm supposed to like stop and go, geez, what could I do to make myself feel better? What are some healthy ways I could get myself out of this? Like when you are spiraling in depression, that's not where your mind goes. Your mind just it enjoys the spiral,
Yeah.
like down there, So it's really hard to be like, what can I do? Which is why you need a support system. So they can be like, hey, you need to go work out now. Like, if you always say you feel good when you do it. So let's go and like, let's get you out there, let's go for a walk.
Yep.
You need those people because it's really hard to ask that of yourself.
100%. And that kind of goes right into what my other questions to you were going to be was, you had people around you during postpartum, right? Some people have a village, some people don't have their village, but like you had these people around you, but not only did you not know that this was a thing, but I'm sure the people around you didn't until this one therapist friend, right, mentioned something. So what is it that you do you think that anyone could have mentioned something or brought something up that would have helped you to notice that earlier? Obviously, the past, but like people listening, what can they do not only for like people around them, but also what can they do maybe to prepare themselves in a way?
My husband used to stay home from work and work in his tiny little home office because he was terrified of leaving me home alone with the child. But he couldn't tell me why, because he didn't know how I would react because I was acting like a crazy person. And the woman that he knew was she just flew out the window a long time ago. So he's like, well, I don't know how to talk to her. She freaks out if I ever say anything. Because then you just feel like you're being accused of being a bad mom. It's like this one thing to just know not how to do naturally. And then you're not even doing it right. So like, great. And then your husband who's does everything right is just going to come over and be like, hey, you're messing up, like it just makes you so angry.
It's aggravating. Yeah.
So, I like was very incapable of hearing things. You know what I mean? Because it's accusatory, because it's not like, hey, I think you need help. It's like, you're doing it wrong. You are doing it bad. You are not a good mom. You don't have maternal instincts. I knew you shouldn't have done this. I knew you regretted this for a reason. You were right not to, you shouldn't have had a baby, all that stuff. So it's very hard to take in. So it's really weird because in a lot of ways, I think maybe the mom sort of has to figure that out for herself, but with the right cues. Like I talked to a family friend a while back and I was like, how are you? And she was like, oh, I'm good. Like we were at a big family event. And she's like, I'm good. She's holding her 4-month-old. And I was like, no, I got really close. I'm like, how are you? She was like, then she like really opened up because I actually wanted to know. And later she messaged me and she's like, you know what? Nobody asked me that yet. Like, and actually like genuinely
no one really pulls it out.
Yeah. And then I like, that made me realize like, oh, there's some things I need to work on, that I need to do. I need to make sure, I need to advocate for myself more. I need to ask my partner for more help. I need to do these things, but that wouldn't have happened if somebody wasn't like giving her the option to like sit there and scan herself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So just having that space, just sitting on a couch in the middle of this chaos that we were in at a family function, I was just like, no, I really need you to like actually tell me how you're feeling. Not like, oh, the baby's so great. Like I wasn't asking about the baby.
Right.
How
right.
Are
Not
you?
that you can fix anything, but sometimes just venting. Sometimes like you need to say the things out loud in order to recognize it. Like you were just saying, right? Yes. Everyone else saying things to you felt so accusatory because you were already in this deep, dark place, right? But they weren't meaning to say it that way. No. It's just that's just where your brain is, right? So you almost have to figure it out on your own, or you have to come to that like help on your own. It's when people say like that you can't help somebody who doesn't want the help. You may want the help, but you mentally, your brain's like, nah, we're good. And so I think that, yeah, asking somebody and giving them the opportunity to, you, like you said, scan themselves, but then
Mhm.
also like say things out loud and then go, wait, did I really just say that? And like, maybe like she said later, texting you being like, wait, I really needed that and I didn't know I needed it. And
Yeah.
maybe she realized that she felt some way that she didn't know.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you just start talking and words come out, you don't even know what they are.
You just hope you're saying it in a safe space.
Right.
Yeah. It's really hard. So the reason I wrote the book, or my goal of the book, was I wanted, one, for you to know the signs of postpartum depression. Two, I wanted you to get the courage to advocate for yourself, because that's a really, really hard thing to do in this particular time in your life. And I needed you to like understand you can get help, but you have to be the one to ask for it. You
Yeah.
really do.
Yeah.
It's a big ask.
I
I understand what I'm asking. I understand that I'm asking a lot of you, but maybe if you read this book or you listen to this podcast, you get the courage to be like, okay, for the sake of my baby, for the sake of our future, for the sake of my mental health, I'm going to do the hard thing and I'm going to
yeah.
get help.
Now, this whole experience is with your first kiddo, right? And ultimately, you did end up deciding to have a second, and you did have a second. Now, what did you do to mentally prepare for this postpartum period the second time? And like, is it something that you think in a way you could have maybe mentally prepared for with the first, even if like you knew the knowledge of it, or like that you think maybe not you, because obviously, like I said, we can't go back and change things, but
Right.
like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
maybe
The
first time
proverbial
pregnant parents is listening could like do?
So my cousin just had a baby and we text a lot, and she's like, there's no way you could have prepared me for this. Like, she listened to my book when she was pregnant,
Yeah.
but so like she knew intellectually, she gets it. But there are certain things about motherhood, just certain things that they have to be experienced. You can't be like, oh, I took your advice. And like, no, like there are certain things where you cannot
Gotta learn on your own.
possibly understand, possibly even like begin to empathize. There's just no way until you're there. So there's just shock factors of it that there's nothing I can do to help you. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're just going to have to go through that fire, and it is what it is. So that's really, really hard, because no matter how prepared you are, you're still very, very like underwhelmingly prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I hate that. Like, I hate that
Right.
there's so much I can do for you. Um, with Ronan, when we decided to have Ronan, Sammy was a year and a couple months. And I was like, I cannot do this again. I will die. I will die. I can't, there's no way. And I looked over at Sammy. He was playing on the floor. And I was like, one day this is all going to go away. Like, my health is going to be fine. And then he's going to be an only child, which I don't want for him. I really, really want him to have a sibling. Like, and I just started like seeing him like at Christmas being alone, or at like birthday parties being alone, or like in a room by himself without like a partner in crime, to like wake up in the middle of the night, sneak around the house and play pranks on mom and dad. I that made me really sad. Like, I really, really knew that Sammy needed to have a sibling. So the intellectual, analytical part of me was like, you're going to be better. And then Sammy forever will be alone. And that's not what I wanted for him.
Right.
So we decided, okay, all right, let's have one. And we wanted to be close in age. Otherwise, you don't even get the benefit of all of that stuff that I mentioned,
Right.
So, so I'm fertile myrtle over here. I got pregnant real fast, which is weird because I have endometriosis. So we thought it would take some time. But it didn't, thank God. So, we had Ronan right away. So I knew, like, I was very trepidatious going into it. And then my anxiety spiked with Ronan really bad. So I had postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, which are two different beasts. And sometimes I was like, oh, I
Right.
think the anxiety might be worse. The
Right.
anxiety, feeling of anxiousness, like, when you're car sick, like that nauseous feeling that you have,
Yeah.
I hate that feeling so, so much. And I get car sick. So I know what that's, and it was just like, it stays with you for hours for me and it just doesn't go away. And the feeling of not being nauseous all the time, I hated. And the feeling of like dread and fear, because that's what anxiety is fear of the future. And then it's worse because it's, in this case, it's like, but why am I anxious? I don't really know. I'm not like, oh, I'm not expecting a call from work, so I'm really
Right.
anxious. I'm anxious of something in the unknown future, but I don't know what. So that was really, it was debilitating. was very debilitating and I hated it. And what was worse is when you have 2 kids, sometimes it's harder to leave the house.
Right.
So summer in Phoenix, just difficult to live.
Yeah.
So I just isolated myself, which made everything harder.
Yeah, understandably so. Now, you were aware of what that postpartum depression felt like the first time. Did you experience it in the same manner the second time? Or do you think that because you were more aware of it, you were able to kind of rationalize with yourself and be like, okay, this is just a right now thought and this will go away kind of a thing?
Yeah, I heard this phrase from a friend where she was like, your depression is lying to you. And I really loved that.
I
It's
love
like,
that.
yeah, because it's not you.
No.
And it's really good to know that that's not you. Just because it's coming from your brain does not mean that it's you or that it's true. It doesn't. So it's a really like difficult concept. And they've written books about this. And The Untethered Soul is a really good one where they talk about like, there's you, and then there's the you that's observing you. Those are 2 different yous. So knowing that like this isn't real was really, really helpful. But the anxiety, you have physical manifestations of anxiety, which can wreak havoc on your body. Also, I was chugging down coffee because I was exhausted, which does not help with your anxiety. But I didn't know, like I didn't really put those 2 together, but I knew coffee made me feel better in the moment, you know?
Yeah. You're right.
So yeah, I was just like fueling my anxiety. It was great.
Just trying to figure it all out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I would love for you to tell everybody where they can find your book, because I have to get myself a copy and actually read it. But we've talked about it, so I feel like I know snippets of it already. But yes, where can they find it, and kind of what is it like to read it? Like, I know you explained to me how you wrote it, but do you want to just kind of explain it to them?
Yeah. So I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. You can buy it on Amazon. It's called Postpartum Me. A little play on words there. It is a dark comedy written in the form of journal entries, and I did this very, very purposely because when I tried to talk to people about my depression, it was a very difficult thing to talk about, and it wasn't always very well received. So I was like, oh, I can't say these things out loud. People don't like it. So what I did is I wrote it in the form of journal entries, so you can get the unfiltered thoughts that I had. And sometimes they were dark, and sometimes they were funny, and sometimes they were a little ridiculous, and sometimes they were nonsensical. But that's okay, because that's like all the feelings that, you know, a young mother is experiencing. So it's just really raw and unfiltered. And it's a little bit like Bridget Jones' diary, you know, it's just sort of all over the place. Yeah, so that's how I wrote it. It's a Amazon bestseller, which was really exciting to.
That's so awesome. Yeah. I just looked it up so I could add the link to the show notes. So I'm going to add that right now. I love that. Now, I always ask everybody, kind of wrapping it up, if you had one piece of advice that you could share with new parents, and maybe like a product or a service or something like that, what kind of advice do you have, and what was like your go-to stuff?
Nipple shield was a good one. My dog kept eating it, which was so weird. Somebody told me this. They were walking out my door and they were like, don't be a hero. If somebody offers help, you take it. And that always really stuck with me, because she was just very firm. She was a mom. Yep. Very, very firm about that you're not meant to do it by yourself. So if somebody offers you help, you don't say, oh, that's okay, I got it. No, you say thank you, and you take the help. Just take that.
They say it takes a village for a reason. Take the help. I love that. Don't be a hero.
The village isn't for the baby. The village is for the mama.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate all of your input on, being willing to share your story, and also just some input on how other people can help support themselves and the people around them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review, and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.